Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered what really goes through a man's mind when you stop contacting him? The truth might shock you, because the moment you step back, the dynamic changes, the power shifts, and suddenly, everything he thought he knew about you and about himself gets turned upside down. What he does next will reveal more about him than months of messages ever could, and understanding this could completely change the way you handle love, attraction, and respect. Stick with me, because what I'm about to share will open your eyes and give you a power you never thought you had. When you stop contacting a man, something powerful happens, not just in his world, but in yours. You create a space that forces clarity, exposes truth, and reveals intentions in ways constant communication never could. And while many people think the silence is about punishing someone or playing a game, the real power comes from choosing yourself first. It's the moment you remind both him and yourself that your time, your energy, and your presence are not freely available to anyone who isn't meeting you equally. When you step back, the first thing he feels, whether he admits it or not, is the sudden absence of your energy. People underestimate the emotional weight of presence. Even a simple "how's your day" carries warmth, attention, and intimacy. When that disappears, he notices. Because humans are wired to feel the loss of what once fed them comfort, validation, or connection. It's in the silence that he realizes how much he had been relying on the consistency of your presence to feel good, grounded, admired, or supported. And interestingly, the mind tends to amplify what it no longer has. That's why someone who took you for granted suddenly remembers every detail about you when you pull away. He starts thinking about your laugh, the tone of your voice, the way you made him feel understood. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. It's not magic, it's psychology. When something stops being available, its perceived value rises, and he suddenly recognizes what he overlooked. But what he does next depends entirely on who he truly is. Some men react quickly. They reach out, they test the waters, they want to know where you went and why the consistent attention disappeared, not because they're ready for something deeper, but because they want to make sure they still have access to you. These are the men who treat your silence as a challenge, not a moment of self-respect. They reach out of curiosity, ego, or convenience. And if you're not careful, their messages can pull you right back into the same cycle you were trying to step out of. Then there are the men who realize your silence is a sign of standards. These are the ones who reflect instead of reacting. They feel the distance and understand that something in their behavior or effort created it. And instead of just sending a casual message, they make a meaningful attempt to show up better. They don't look for temporary reassurance. They try to earn back your presence. This kind of man understands that your silence isn't manipulation. It's self-preservation. And he responds to it with maturity. But the most important reaction isn't his, it's yours. Because when you stop contacting him, you stop distracting yourself. You stop pouring emotional bandwidth into someone who might not be giving enough in return. You stop chasing answers from a person who wasn't offering clarity. You stop negotiating for crumbs of affection when you deserve the whole meal. And in that quiet space, you start hearing your own voice again. This is where the real transformation happens. You begin to remember what your life feels like when you're not anxiously waiting for a text. You remember the hobbies, the passions, the routines that make you feel alive. You reconnect with your friends. You sleep better. You breathe deeper, and you realize how much emotional noise that connection was creating. You didn't just stop contacting him, you stopped abandoning yourself. And once you return to your center, something remarkable shifts. Your confidence rises. Your standards sharpen, your boundaries strengthen. You no longer feel panicked by his silence because you're no longer trying to win someone who isn't trying to win you. You realize that a man who truly wants you will never require you to chase him. You see clearly that consistency is not too much to ask for, effort is not a luxury, and reciprocation is not a favor. In that silence, you also gain a rare view. You get to see who he is without your influence. Does he put effort into reconnecting with you? Does he realize your absence and step forward with clarity? Does he show that he genuinely values what you bring to his life? Or does he do nothing, revealing that your presence mattered far more to you than it ever did to him? A man's response to your silence tells you exactly what you need to know about his intentions. If he disappears, it's not a loss. It's a blessing. It's the universe removing someone who wasn't meant to walk with you any further. If he comes back half-heartedly, you've got your answer too. He liked the comfort you provided, but had no intention of giving you the emotional investment you deserve. And if he returns with real effort, real honesty, and real consistency, then the silence served its purpose. It created the space needed for clarity and growth, both for him and for you. But even then, you'll notice that you no longer see him with the same level of urgency. Because once you taste peace, chaos loses its appeal. Once you experience emotional freedom, you stop craving relationships that drain you. Once you remember your worth, you stop accepting anything less than someone who actively chooses you. Stopping contact isn't about proving a point. It's about refusing to negotiate your self-respect. It's about letting go of relationships built on uncertainty. It's about freeing yourself from emotional dependency. And most importantly, it's about making room for someone who doesn't need silence to realize your value. He sees it from the start, because when you stop contacting him, you don't just see what he will do, you see what you will do. You rise higher, you grow stronger, you reclaim your peace, you choose yourself, and that choice changes everything. And when you choose yourself, you begin to see the world and him through a completely different lens. Suddenly, the behaviors you once tolerated feel foreign to you. The moments where you used to compromise your needs now stand out as reminders of how much you've grown. The little excuses you used to accept no longer make sense, because you're operating from a place of clarity, not craving. And with this new clarity, you stop hoping someone will change and instead start noticing whether they already show up as the person you need. This is the moment that often surprises him most, because while he's busy wondering why you've gone quiet, you're busy realizing why you stayed so long. You're connecting dots you once ignored. You're piecing together behaviors that you previously brushed aside. You're seeing how much energy you poured into someone who wasn't feeding you anything meaningful in return. And that realization gives you a sense of power, not over him, but over your own life. Silence has a way of revealing truths with a sharpness that words can never achieve. In the quiet, you start remembering what it feels like to be treated well. You recall the times in your life when love felt easy, not draining. You reconnect with the version of you who didn't second-guess her worth, and you start aspiring to be her again, someone grounded, confident, and unwilling to chase anyone who isn't meeting her halfway. As this inner shift happens, he feels something changing too. Even if he can't articulate it, he senses that your energy is no longer revolving around him. He feels that he's no longer the center of your emotional world. And this creates a ripple effect. The dynamic he once relied on, where he gave little and still received much, begins to break down. He realizes he can't depend on your affection being guaranteed, and that makes him uncomfortable in ways he didn't expect. Some men try to regain that comfort by resurfacing with familiar patterns. They send a simple hey or a late-night message just to see if you'll respond. They test the waters with minimal effort, hoping you'll fill in the emotional gaps like you always did. But by now, you've changed. You're no longer tempted by breadcrumbs. You're no longer satisfied with vague attention. And while the old you would have melted at the slightest sign of interest, the new you feels nothing but indifference toward the inconsistency. This is one of the strongest signs of growth, when the things that used to thrill you now feel empty. When you recognize how low the bar was, not because he set it, but because you accepted it. And in this moment, you realize your silence wasn't about him at all. It was about breaking your own habit of overgiving. It was about teaching yourself to pause instead of pursue. It was about earning to receive instead of constantly proving your worth. And that internal shift affects how men show up around you. A man who was once passive suddenly becomes more intentional. He senses that your energy has changed, and he knows that he can't return to you with the same level of effort as before. So he either steps up or steps out. And while that may seem harsh, it's actually liberating, because whether he takes action or fades away, you get the truth you need. His reaction during your absence reveals what his presence in your life would have looked like long term. If he steps up, it usually comes with a different tone. He may express more vulnerability, more accountability, or more genuine interest. He's not just trying to get your attention, he's trying to earn your respect. He's not sending empty messages, he's offering clarity. He may tell you he's been thinking, reflecting, or realizing what he stood to lose. And while that doesn't guarantee everything will suddenly become perfect, it does show that the silence served its purpose. But if he does nothing, if your absence doesn't move him to act, then you gain the most valuable insight of all. You learn that he was never going to be the man who put in effort. You learn that nothing you could have done, more texting, more patience, more love, would have changed the outcome. You learn that his lack of effort wasn't personal, it was who he was. And accepting that truth frees you from the illusion that you could have changed him if you had just tried harder. And while this truth can sting, it also sets you free. Because once you understand that his behavior has nothing to do with your value, you stop tying your worth to his actions. You stop seeing his silence as rejection and start seeing it as redirection. You stop wondering whether you were enough for him and start realizing that he wasn't enough for you. Is the power of pulling back. It reveals who someone really is, but it also reveals who you're becoming. And what you're becoming is someone who doesn't settle, someone who doesn't chase uncertainty, someone who doesn't confuse mixed signals with chemistry, someone who no longer feels anxiety over whether someone texts back, someone who knows that love should feel secure, reciprocated, and consistent. As you continue on this path, something even more profound happens. Your standards rise without you even trying, not in a demanding or unrealistic way, but in a quiet, grounded way that says, I know who I am and I know what I bring. You no longer need someone to validate your worth because you feel it internally. You no longer tolerate someone's indifference because you're too full of self-respect to accept the bare minimum. And here's the irony. It's often when you reach this point that the same man who once took you for granted starts chasing you. Not because you played a game, but because your energy shifted from seeking love to embodying it. You're no longer trying to impress him. You're no longer trying to win him. You're simply living your life, being your best self, and that self is magnetic. Men are drawn to women who value themselves. Men feel compelled to pursue women who have emotional independence. Men are naturally attracted to women who can walk away, not out of coldness, but out of confidence. Your silence transformed you into that woman. But now the difference is this: you're not moved by temporary attention anymore. You're not flattered by minimal effort. You're not swayed by inconsistent affection. You're looking for alignment, not excitement. You're looking for reciprocity, not potential. And because your energy is so grounded, you're no longer afraid of losing someone. You're more afraid of losing yourself. So when he finally comes back, and often he will, you meet him with a calmness that surprises even you. You're no longer emotionally hungry. You're no longer trying to prove your worth. You're evaluating him with clear eyes, steady emotions, and a heart that knows exactly what it deserves. And suddenly, everything becomes simple. You either see effort or you don't. You see intention or you don't. You see readiness or you don't. You see consistency or you don't. Because the silence taught you something you never want to forget. The right man will not need you to disappear to realize your worth. He will see it while you're standing in front of him. He will respect it without being forced. He will meet your effort with equal effort, your clarity with clarity, your presence with presence. And until that man arrives, you stay grounded in your silence, not as a tactic, but as a standard. Not to manipulate him, but to protect yourself. Not to win someone back, but to keep yourself from losing your peace again. Because once you've grown through the quiet, once you've healed in the stillness, and once you've reconnected with your strength, you'll never again be the woman who chases, begs, or settles. You'll be the woman who knows that losing a man is nothing compared to losing yourself, and that choosing yourself will always, always lead you somewhere better. And as you stand in that new place within yourself, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop needing closure from him because you've already given closure to yourself. You begin to understand that closure isn't something someone hands you in a neatly packaged explanation. Closure is the moment you stop asking questions that won't change the reality. It's the moment you stop replaying conversations, stop rewriting history in your mind, stop wondering how things could have gone differently. Closure becomes the moment you simply decide to move forward, even if the past never gave you the answers you thought you needed. This self-created closure shifts the entire balance of power in your life. Suddenly, your emotional stability no longer depends on a message, a call, an apology, or a confession. You no longer check your phone hoping for a sign of life from him. You no longer fall asleep waiting for a notification. You no longer feel your worth fluctuate with someone else's inconsistency. Instead, you start regulating your emotions from within, not through the unpredictable actions of someone who once kept you guessing. At the same time, the absence you created continues to echo in his world, because while you've been growing, healing, and rediscovering yourself, he's been feeling the weight of everything he once took lightly. Your silence forces him to confront himself. It exposes the parts of him he was able to avoid when you were always there to soothe the emotional gaps. And now, without you filling the space, he's left to face what he never dealt with. Some men feel this as a subtle, dull ache that creeps into their days. Simple moments, passing a place you once talked about, hearing a song that reminds him of you, scrolling through old messages, become reminders of what he mishandled. Others feel it sharply, like a sudden realization that they underestimated someone who was once consistently kind, supportive, and emotionally available. And as he processes this, he begins to see the contrast between what he had with you and what he has without you. But while he's unraveling the impact of your absence, you're building a whole new version of yourself, one that no longer tolerates half-effort connections. You start attracting different energy from people around you. Friends notice your glow, colleagues sense your confidence, new people enter your life and appreciate you without being prompted. You begin to feel more aligned with opportunities, more tuned into your goals, more grounded in your identity. You may even find yourself smiling for no specific reason, simply because you feel lighter. The emotional weight you carried was heavier than you realized, and releasing it gives you a clarity that almost feels like relief. You start showing up in the world differently. Not desperate, not waiting, not hoping someone will choose you, but choosing yourself in every small decision you make. It's during this transformation that you start to notice something interesting. The standards you once thought were too high now feel like the bare minimum. You understand that someone reaching out occasionally doesn't equal consistency. Someone sending sweet words doesn't equal emotional availability. Someone claiming to care doesn't equal effort. You learn to read patterns instead of promises. You learn to observe actions instead of intentions. And that shift alone protects you from falling back into the same emotional traps. Meanwhile, your silence becomes a mirror for him. He begins to question his habits, why he didn't invest more, why he didn't communicate better, why he didn't appreciate you when he had the chance. He starts comparing every new interaction to the depth and warmth you offered. And even if he tries to pretend he's unaffected, he feels the difference, because the truth is, genuine connection is rare. And even if he wasn't ready for it when he had it, he feels its absence now. Your silence also dismantles the illusion that you'd always be there. Many men assume a woman who cares deeply will never walk away. They mistake loyalty for dependency, consistency for neediness, emotional depth for weakness. But the moment you assert your boundaries through silence, that illusion shatters. He realizes you weren't attached, you were invested, you weren't dependent, you were devoted. And devotion has limits when it's not reciprocated. This realization often wakes something up in him. He starts wondering if you've moved on, if you're talking to someone else, if someone is treating you with the effort he withheld. He imagines you laughing, glowing, rising. And the idea that another man might be experiencing the version of you he never valued becomes a source of discomfort he didn't expect. But by the time he comes to these realizations, something significant has already shifted. You no longer feel the emotional hunger that once tied you to him. You've filled your own cup. You're operating from abundance, not lack. You're not asking, will he come back? But rather, do I even want him back now that I know my worth? This is the point where everything changes, because now you're not guided by attachment. You're guided by discernment. You're able to look at him not with longing, but with clarity. You see not who he could be, but who he actually was. You stop romanticizing potential and begin honoring reality. And in that reality, you see exactly what he offered and what he didn't. When he eventually reaches out, which often happens, you're no longer the same person he remembers. You respond slower, not out of coldness, but because your life is full. You say less because you no longer overextend to keep conversations alive. You observe rather than assume, and you listen carefully, not to his words, but to his consistency. And if he truly wants to be in your life again, he'll have to rise to meet the version of you that emerged from the silence. He'll have to show you through effort, not excuses, through action, not charm, through presence, not promises, because the woman he once knew tolerated inconsistency. The woman you became does not, but even then, you're not waiting for him anymore. You're not basing your future on whether he returns or how he behaves. You're standing firmly in your own evolution, allowing life to bring the right people and remove the wrong ones. And perhaps the greatest shift of all is this: you no longer see his lack of effort as something wrong with you. You see it as something lacking in him. You stop personalizing his emotional immaturity. You stop taking responsibility for someone else's inability to show up. You stop blaming yourself for the love he wasn't ready to receive. You finally understand that sometimes silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the presence of self-worth, and anyone who truly belongs in your life will recognize that worth without needing to lose you first.